Snow took the wall's face in the weeks that followed, smoothing its scars so that from the yard it seemed a single cut of ice cleaved from the sky. On the night the wind turned hard from the east, Tywin and Hake came in with 2 corpses lashed to their saddles, stiff as planks and rimed with frost. Arthur had been a rangy man with a scar like a second eyebrow. Jafer Flowers' hands were still curved as if they meant to hold something. They did not stink. That was what haunted Jon more than the stillness. Anything that had been a man ought to be returned to the world's roundness with a smell. "We found them 2 miles beyond the Milkwater," Tywin said. His beard whitened with blown snow. "Laid out like they meant to sleep and forgot how. No tracks that made sense. No birds." Horse shied twice at nothing, stood an hour right still and then would go again. "Bring them into the ice," Jeor Mormont ordered. "Not to the cold cells. The cold is outside. Leave them with the builders. Bowen Marsh, send to the Shadow Tower. I want to know if Corran's seen the same lean and nothing." Jon helped lift Arthur onto the trestles in the builder's shed. The corpse's weight seemed wrong, heavy in parts and light in others, like a sack that had sagged where its contents shifted. Ghost would not come near the bodies. He stood at the door and roughed low in his throat, a sound Jon had not heard from him before. Not warning and not fear, but something that refused to name either. He woke with smoke in his nose and Ghost's paws on his chest. For an instant he thought he had dreamed of fire, and then he heard the muffled curse of a man trying not to shout and the crackle of burning wool. He rolled, Ghost already off him, in a white bolt and tore the latch free. Mormont's chambers were the fire's mouth. Flame ran up the arras like a beast that had decided to climb. The old bear had a chair overturned and a poker in his hands and blood at his ear. The thing in the corner had been a man. Now it was a shape that threw light wrong when it moved. Its eyes were not the eyes of the dead. They were a glacier's glare, bright and depthless. Jon caught the first blow on the flat of his blade more by the arm's memory than any plan. The force of it shook his elbow to the bone. He went low because Syrio had once said a man who goes low makes a tall man awkward, and he thrust because that was what a thorn bush did when touched. The thing did not bleed when steel went in. It tried to pull the sword from him like a butcher tugging a stubborn rib from its rack. Ghost leapt and took it at the throat and was thrown against the wall with a sound that was both a yelp and a snarl. "Fire!" Mormont bellowed. "Use the damned fire!" There was a brand fallen from the brazier, its tip dulling. Jon snatched it and drove it home where the thing's jaw worked. The flesh hissed. There was a stink then that had nothing to do with men and everything to do with old rot that had been kept too long in the cold. The thing flailed, batting Jon across the shoulder with such force he thought the bone had cracked, then began to burn the way rottenwood burned, catching quick and then slower, deeper, as if the flame had to climb down into it one rung at a time. By the time Tywin burst in with a bucket and 10 men, the white was sagging and the old bear had Mormont's cloak around his bare shoulders and his face set like a man swallowing a bitter draught. "Get the other one out of the shed," Mormont rasped when there was air to rasp. "Chop it into kindling and burn it under the wall. Then wake the maester and make him write his hands to bone. The South will hear this, though they will not listen." At dawn, with ash still in his throat and the skin of his forearm blistered where fire had kissed, Jon stood in the yard with Mormont's sword across his palms. The blade was a handsome thing, a little too long for Jon's arm and a little too heavy in the tip to be comfortable at once, but honest. A bear's head capped the pommel. Black leather wrapped the grip in a crosshatch that fit a man's palm. "It was my son's," Mormont said. "He has no need of it now. He has a need for bright colors and peacocks and a city where men forget their oaths. You do not. You used fire when steel would not serve. The sword was wasted in the South. See if it does better work with you." Jon did not say that the sword had a name. To speak it aloud would be to take a thing from a man and give it to himself. He bowed his head, and the weight of the bear's steel on his hands felt like a blessing that understood it was also a burden. Afterward, when the word had gone on black wings and a fear colder than any wind settled into Corner's men were careful not to notice, the Lord Commander called a council. Samwell Tarly stood with ink on his fingers and the ghost of sleep in his eyes. Bowen Marsh smelled of damp wool and anxiety. Eamon's clouded gaze held more clarity than most men's sharpened points. "We ride in a week," Mormont said. "We take the strength we can spare and more besides, because what we do not know is larger than what we do. We go to the fist of the first men and then beyond to find what drives the wildlings like fish before a net. We will learn if Mance Raider means to beat us at our own wall or help us keep it up long enough to die with comfort." He turned his head toward Jon. "You will ride with me." Jon felt his chest rise and fall against something in it he could not name. Ghost's ears flicked in the silence as if he heard a word men could not. When Jon slipped away after the council, he found Sam under the rookery with a raven perched on his shoulder. The bird stabbed its beak at the air near Sam's ear as if it wanted to hammer thought into the boy's skull. "You will not go?" Jon asked. Sam laughed a little, that breathless, private laugh of his that made strangers think he mocked them when he only mocked himself. "I will go wherever Lord Commander points me if I can make my horse understand what I mean. I have no wish to argue with the Lord Commander. He is large. Large men can be wrong," Jon said. "And small men can be right by accident," Sam replied. He looked at Jon's arm. "You are hurt." "I am mended," Jon said, because the skin's anger and the bone's ache were facts and did not require words to become truer. He put his hand on Sam's shoulder and felt bird and boy both flinch. Then still. "Write to my father," he added. "Tell him what we saw. He will carry it to those who will hear. The rest of the realm will dance with its tongues till winter cuts them off." "I already have," Sam said. "Maester Aemon dictated 3 letters and I wrote 2 more he did not ask for and then did not send because I am a coward." "You are not," Jon said. "I am frightened, which is not the same thing." "I will send them now," Sam murmured, and the raven on his shoulder croaked a harsh sound that might have been a laugh. Riverrun's towers were gray as river rock and glanced with fins of light where the sun stroked them. The tumblestones' voices came loud against the keep and rolled away, and the fords had become treacheries with the autumn water rising and falling as if the river were breathing in its sleep. When Ned rode through the eastern gate with Robb and Catelyn and their men, the portcullis rattled down behind them with a satisfaction that might have been pride or relief. Hoster Tully lay upon a bed drawn near a hearth that could not hold the cold back from his bones. His breath came with a drag and a catch. His eyes were Hoster's eyes, though, and when they fixed on his daughter's face there was a long moment in which pain seemed to take a step back and let joy pass. "Cat," he said. Then, with thin humor that had somehow grown bigger in sickness, "You were always dragging men through my gates, girl. First a wolf pup, then a stag. Now another wolf. You might have given me a garden." Catelyn knelt and kissed his cheek. "I have given you a river full of fish to scold, father." Brynden Blackfish stood at the foot of the bed, lean as a spear that has learned patience. He clasped Ned's forearm in the river fashion. "I could say I am pleased to see you breathing, Stark," he said, "but I have grown fond of truth in my old age. And truth says I am pleased to see you where you might make other men breathe longer." "We will try," Ned said. "Where is Edmure?" "On the walls, shouting at men who are not deaf," Brynden replied. "The lions have clawed at our doors all season. They sit at the crossroads and at the fords, and they do not come all the way in because that would be work and costly. Your boy has a look in his eye I remember on your brother's better days. I will see if he can turn look to deed." Robb stood taller than when Ned had last measured him in a doorway. He had grown into his mail like a fish grows into water. It moved with him. The great Jon boomed near him, laughing at his own laughter. Roose Bolton watched in white wool, quiet as old snow. Howland Reed leaned in the shadow at the edge of the hall as if any room were a swamp you took care crossing. "The phrase," Brynden reminded them later, "over a table scattered with pebbles and bread heels to mark men and rivers. We can dance with our cousins like trouts while we wait for a better tune, or we can step into their hall and let them count our toes. They will ask a price they think we cannot pay," Catelyn said. She could count Walder Frey's once the way a cook counts eels by weight. "We will pay a different price and make him believe it is the one he asked." "What price?" Robb demanded, impatience bright in him as a sword newly polished. Edmure will marry where the river requires, Catelyn said, and did not look at her brother when she said it. If Lord Walder offers a daughter of breeding and temper, we will accept it. If he offers one that suits only his humor, we will accept that too. I will write to Lisa, not because she will answer, but because letters serve as nets sometimes for fish you cannot see. Ned looked at Brynden. I need you to look past the twins and see me where I am not, he said. Walder will haggle till spring for the pleasure of it. We do not have till spring. Robb will take a part of our strength west of the Green Fork and try the lions where they have begun to purr. You want the boy to do your ambushing. You will do the old man's work, Brynden said, but there was approval in his voice like iron rubbed to a sheen. Good. I will put men at the ford who like to pretend to be fish. The fry boys who do not look like the others are the ones to trust. They have learned how to live near Walder without becoming Walder. They rode to the twins with river mist in their lungs. The castles stood on their stone islands like two old men who had long ago forgotten why they glared and had made the glare into habit. Walder Frye received them in a hall that smelled of broth and impatience. He sat with his skinny wife at his elbow and children in ranks like the teeth of a rake and looked Ned Stark up and down as if measuring what meat might be left on a man who had already been eaten once. Lord Stark, he said, and the sarcasm rested on the title like a bird on a bough. We heard you were dead. Men bring me news all day. I keep it in a larder and take it out at night and pick my teeth with the bones. I have had poor news and better news both, Ned said. I have decided not to let either spoil my appetite. Walder's laugh was a cough. And you bring wolves to my bridge. I bring toll, Ned said. Horses for your stables, grain out of White Harbor bound for your storehouses. A promise cut in iron that no man crossing your bridge in my service will take bread from your people without paying with a coin. Edmure Tully will take a fry to wife and be faithful if she is faithful and bear children who look like both the river and the stone it runs around. When the realm has its breath again, my daughter Arya will spend a season here with my lady to learn what it is to keep a house that is also a hinge. She is not naturally inclined to hinges. His mouth quirked. You will like her because you will not like her. The old man's eyes watched him with the cagey brightness of a fox. And what if I say I want a Stark to plant a fry in Winterfell? I hear one of your girls is pretty as summer. The other, he made a face, has knees that look like they've introduced themselves to every rock in the north. Sansa is in the city, Catelyn said, and the iron she had planted in the words made them heavy. You know that, Lord Walder. You know who holds her, and you know what it takes to get things out of a lion's mouth. You will name prices you cannot collect and then pretend you did not want them when you cannot collect them. The river is not moved by noise. It is moved by weight. We are giving you weight. Take it and do not pretend your hands are too small. Walder watched her. He enjoyed being spoken to as if he were dangerous. It reminded him he was. He glanced at Lothar, who stood with a face like a well-mannered sack of flour and quick eyes. He looked past Olivar, who wore sweetness the way some men wore hats. He licked his lips. The Tully boy then, he conceded. But I will choose which daughter. I have a mind to try my luck with matches the way I throw dice. Edmure will be gentle, Catelyn said. He does not know how not to be. Gentle men are seldom popular among wives. Walder sniffed, and then grinned sudden and thin as parchment. But I take your meaning. Very well. You may march. Walk quiet over my stones. I have grown fond of hearing my own heart. They crossed at dusk when the river had put on its evening cloak. Torches made chain light along the causeway. Men did look like fish there, as Brynden had promised, their helms wet with drips and their hauberks dark as if they swam while standing. Robb rode with the van and did not look back because boys who wanted to be men learned to swallow that urge when it rose. The whispering would whispered because wind made leaves speak, but also because men moved in it with mouths closed. Robb lay on a slope and felt damp through the belly of his jerkin. The moon kept throwing dice with the clouds and losing. The Great John breathed like a forge. The blackfish seemed not to breathe at all. A Tully man slipped up and set his mouth against Robb's ear. They're coming, he said. and the whisper made Robb want to twitch, except he did not. Horses. Not many. Lannister will ride ahead and forget, Brynden murmured. He will not forget, Robb said. He will pretend his remembering is an insult. That way he can be gallant when he kills men who are wiser than he is. You do not like him. Brynden's voice had humor and a kind of surprise. I have no liking for boys who call their cruelty wit, Robb said. I will take him if the gods are willing. If the gods are not, I will take the men who think themselves lucky to ride in the wake of his laughter. The horses made their own weather among the trees. A sweat smell and a small thunder. Jaime Lannister rode with a white cloak rolled behind his saddle and a grin like a blade's reflected face. His armor was too clean for the river's work. The look on his face when the first net of rope snapped up from the leaf mold and caught his horse at the knee was not fear. It was astonishment that someone else had found a jest to play. They hit them low, as Howland Reed had counseled, and close, so that noise would be swallowed by the wood. Robb was forced to kill a man with bad teeth and a better blade before he could speak. After, there was too much motion for speech, so he made himself a path through the bodies as if making a path through bracken, and found the Kingslayer tangled with his horse's legs, laughing because others would have cried. You, Jaime said, as if greeting a dinner companion. If I were wearing a dress, would you be kinder? I would be more suspicious, Robb said, and then the world was a hinge with 200 hands on it, and whether it opened the way he wanted would depend on whether he could keep his own fingers out of the narrowing seam. They pulled the Kingslayer free when his wrist cracked under a blow meant for his skull. His sword went skittering. The Great John put a boot on it, and Brynden stepped in with the easiest humor in the world and said, My lord, I have always admired your grace. You will understand ours takes a different shape. Jaime looked up at Robb, not at the men who held him. Where is the father? He asked blithely. I should like to look into the eyes of the man who taught you to be dull. I've learned a few jokes, Robb said, because victory had found him and he could afford the smallest scrap of laughter below the ribs. Tie him. Do not let the rope touch his neck. He will be needed to bargain with people who think their reflections make them kings. The battle at the camps began with a horse that bolted and a boy who chased it and tripped and set fire to a line of straw that had been intentionally placed near a stack of oiled wood. Designs have souls when crafted well. The Fry men who did not look like the others lit fuses quietly, and the Umber men who wanted noise made noise, and Lannister tents began to glow like lanterns that had decided to be houses. Grown men tumbled out of sleep. Panic made them generals in their own minds and fools in each other's. Roose Bolton moved like ice under the smoke. He spared words because men often wasted them as if they were food. He did not spare the knives he had set in hands trained to cut throats as easily as bacon. By dawn, the Lannister rear had learned the lesson it had wanted to teach others: that a man's sleep belongs to whoever guards it when he cannot. Edmure stood on Riverrun's wall and wept when the river's breeze brought him the taste of victory. He wiped his face angrily as if the water insulted him. When Robb came back with the Kingslayer and a handful of white cloaks who had lost their white, Edmure had his chin high and his pride cut across it like a third jaw. He embraced his nephew hard enough to bruise and kissed Ned's cheek in the old way, and then turned to Jaime with a breath drawn deep as if it were a wine he meant to savor. You killed men I loved, he said. Some of them respected you. Most of them did not. I will try and be like the first group while you are our guest. I delight in your efforts, Jaime replied, and then grunted when the Great John prodded him forward with a hand like a door. Do not grow too attached to me. The realm seems intent on rearranging itself and usually drops fine things. We will drop you only as far as you bounce, the Great John promised cheerfully. In King's Landing, Tyrion Lannister stood in a room that had been filled with maps and men who pretended to be maps. He felt the city under his feet the way a man with good boots feels the grade of a road. It was climbing toward panic the way a hill climbs toward its own name. Bronn flicked a straw out of his teeth with his tongue and looked bored because that was his way of saying he was listening very carefully. Chain, Tyrion said. Stretch it across the river where the Blackwater narrows. Anchor it so deep that a kraken would tire before it could pry it. I have the smiths I need. You can have the ones not making swords for boy kings to wave, Bronn said. And the ones who will see you paying coin and decide swords are a luxury when their wives do not have meat. Good. Tyrion rolled his shoulders as if his body carried a weight and he could shift it by wit alone. Wildfire. Haleen the pyromancer's mouth tried to smile and looked instead like wax that had leaned too near a can. Lee, the wisdoms are producing at a rate not seen since Aerys' time, he declared. We have 1,600 jars. By the time it is needed, we will have more. You will store them where the sun does not decide to help you, Tyrion said, and you will tell no man who is free to drink. I want ears in every alley that smells of selling secrets. Varys. The eunuch folded long hands into apologies. All ears are very busy, he murmured, but some are at your service. The city repeats itself, my lord, tells new lies with the same mouth. It will let you know when it is ready to bite. His eyes warmed a fraction. A word from the Riverlands. A certain golden knight has decided to travel and found himself bound for too long. Tyrion's heart made an odd motion for a man who had always told it not to do so. Jaime, he said, as if the name were a tooth that had loosened. Well, we will need fewer apples for the king's smile for a time. Cersei cares, Varys answered softly, and when she cares, she cuts. He looked toward the window where the city's roofs made a lie of neatness. There is another matter. A letter with a seal that did not look friendly to lions. It speaks of bastardy as if it were a brand to be pressed and not an insult whispered. The Storm Lord has found his quill. Tyrion walked to the window and leaned his brow briefly to the cool stone. Stannis is a nail, he said, and what a shame that so many men find hammers fashionable. He turned. We will take this city through the worst of its mood if we can. If we cannot, we will arrange for it to wake from its riot with surprise at how tidy everything still is. Joffrey will stay off the walls. If the boy insists on performance, we will give him a stage and a safe audience. The Hound will be his curtain. Sansa Stark stood on a balcony and watched the ants below enact their small wars. The river's air could not reach her properly here. The city's breath riddled it. She could smell hot iron and the sharp sweetness that meant the alchemists had opened their cellars. She knew that smell now and did not like knowing it. Ser Dantos came sozzled to beg for her favor again, and she gave it because pretending at kindness cost her less than refusing the role she had been handed. The Hound watched her once from a shadow and tilted his head like a dog listening. He left without speaking. Sometimes Sansa thought she would go mad if no one spoke when they looked at her. Then Joffrey would speak, and she would think speech overrated. Letters came with seals broken and words underlined by hands that were not her father's. Once there was a page that smelled of the river and said, "Only I am alive and I will make that more true," written in Ned's plain hand. She held it until the edges softened. She hid it where Cersei would not find it and also where she might, because a small part of Sansa had learned that letting the Queen discover exactly what one wanted her to see kept some smaller things safe. Arya traveled with Yoren through a land that seemed to be trying to decide whether it wanted to live. Fields put up thin green as if apologizing. Smoke climbed from places where men had never meant smoke to be. Gendry watched the road as if waiting for a piece of iron he would recognize to fall out of the sky so he could beat it into something that would bear weight. Hot pie had taken to humming to his bread. The boy shaped loaves as if thinking of mothers he did not name made him safer. The three in the cage watched like men who had made their lives out of looking through iron. One had a face like a burned pot. One had no nose. One spoke with words that moved like paint being poured. "A girl has quick eyes," that one said once, his gaze resting not on Arya's face but somewhere near it, as if her look were a flame too bright. "Quick eyes save very large men and very small ones." "She is a boy," Yoren snapped. "Not a boy, not a girl, a flea, quiet." He coughed, and the sound left wetness in the air. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and glanced away from what he had seen there. "We keep on. We do not look behind us because the men behind us have more horses and more liking for killing than is reasonable. We do not stop at inns because some innkeepers learned how to sell men as easily as beer. We walk as if our feet were all we owned. Arya learned to step with the rhythm of men who had no homes but their steps. At night she lay with a cloak over her and recited names in her head like prayers, and the names changed order, and sometimes one fell off and sometimes another climbed. She did not know whether that meant the gods listened or only that her mouth did not always follow the same path through a forest full of thorns. Word of Jaime's capture went along the Mander like a fish that wanted to be caught and succeeded. Stannis read the letter twice and then 3 times and looked at Maester Cresson without any pretense. "We will trade him," he said. "Not for the queen's lies. For a girl and peace enough to move a wagon of bread through the city without 6 men sticking their hands into the flour." "Davos. A parley with men who sharpen their words," Davos said. "I can bring you one. Whether they intend to speak is another matter." "Speak or not, they will hear," Stannis said. "Write to Lord Stark. He will make the River Lords stand together where they itch to scratch. We will put White Harbor's grain on boats and try to teach the city that eating is better than burning." He did not send Melisandre because he did not have her. Cresson lived and wrote with a hand that cramped and did not complain. Davos took the galley that moved fastest when men were willing to bleed. He slipped into King's Landing's stink as if it were a garment he had not missed until he put it on again. He sat in a room with Tyrion Lannister where the air held the smell of burning sugar and felt his throat want to close. The dwarf drank wine as if it would argue with him and lose pleasantly. They did not call each other friend. They did not need the word to speak the thing it meant. "The Kingslayer for the Lady Sansa," Davos said, "and for safe conduct of grain, and for a promise that the boy king will not be set on a wall with a bough where good sense says to keep him inside with a blanket." "And in return?" Tyrion asked, as if the word were a coin he had to bite. "In return," Davos said, "Lord Stannis Baratheon, protector of the realm by the king's own hand and Lord Stark's counsel, will not march on your walls while you sort your own bedsheets. He will march instead into the Riverlands and pull some of your banners out of villagers' thatch where they have been put to dry like laundry." Tyrion's smile came and went like a cat's tail at the edge of sight. "You want the girl," he said. "You want bread to go where men are hungry. You want time. You are an odd man, Onion Knight. Most men who come through this door want their heads rubbed." "I lack the hair for it," Davos replied. "True," Tyrion said, and looked amused in a way that seemed, for an instant, to soothe him. Then it left, and what looked out of his eyes was not a man who had ever been soothed. "Cersei will not like it. Joffrey will not comprehend it. I will be forced to pretend to be crueler than I am in order to make those who are more cruel than I believe I know how to please them." He tipped the cup and considered the wine as if it were a theorem. "We will do it, quietly. If it is very quiet, my sister will not notice until the girl is too far on the river to be hauled back by her hair." Davos nodded once. "You have my word that my lord will not choose this day to come with ladders. If the day changes, we will tell you why, and you will either agree or arrange for our ships to kiss rocks." He rose. "Tell the girl to be ready. When the hour comes, it will not knock politely." Sansa went down to the river at night with a hood that made her head feel smaller. Ser Dantos had told her a story and told her to be brave, and she had nodded as if the story were a truth. A man with thick fingers took her arm and did not bruise it. He put her into a boat where a woman with a scar at her lip sat holding a bundle under a blanket that moved once like a baby and was instead a bag of flour. "Do not speak," the woman said, not unkindly. "Not because I am a monster. Because sound is a mouth that eats you when you think you are feeding it." Sansa did not speak. She kept her eyes on the plank where her feet rested and counted grain dust as if counting it would weigh the world down enough to keep it from tipping. When she looked up, they were under the shadow of a galley whose sides had been stained with tar and secrets. A hand reached down. When it pulled her up, she stumbled into a chest that was solid and smelled of salt. She looked into the face of a man with fingers cut down too short and eyes that had known fewer lies than most. "You've good manners for a city," Davos said quietly. "Most would choose this moment to panic. I prefer it when panic comes earlier." "Sir," Sansa whispered, then bit her lip because not speaking had not made the boat tip and she had been warned. "Not sir," Davos said. "Smuggler. Knight only if you count it by the weight of a story." He wrapped a cloak around her that was 2 sizes too small and infinitely warmer than anything she had worn in months. "We are going to a place where men do not always smile when they say your name, but they will not lie to you as often. There is comfort in that when you have learned not to require much else." On the river, dawn was gray wool. Ned stood on the quay at Riverrun and watched the galley slide close like a fish that had decided it would prefer a net to the open water for a time. When Davos's head came above the rail, Ned felt his heart make a small motion. When the girl in the cloak came after, and her hair flashed dull copper even under the weak light, the heart found its work and beat properly. He had thought he would be careful. He had thought he would be mannered. He was neither. He crossed the planks as if they would hold for him and no other and took Sansa into his arms and did not think of the river's cold or the men watching. "Father?" Sansa said faintly into his shoulder, and the word had dust in it and tears and a small sound like relief being broken. "It is all right," Ned said, which was a lie men tell when they want to give others courage. He did not correct it. He kissed her hair. "It will be more nearly all right now." Catelyn came and folded her arms around both of them as if she could make new skin over old injury. For a moment they stood as 3 who had suffered their separate things and recalled that they had once been one thing together. Then Sansa pulled away and looked from her father to her mother and tried to smile, and a girl looked out through a lady's mask. "Where is Arya?" she asked. "Coming," Ned said, because he had decided that day to allow himself that lie. It might be true. He believed he could carry it long enough for truth to catch up to it. Jaime Lannister was traded for a river and a girl. He walked out under guard with a face that made men want to strike him because it was careless of their anger. Brienne of Tarth, who had sworn a different oath in a different camp and burned with it, was not there. She held Renly's banner and guarded a man who was, for the moment, still alive. Jaime looked back once only at Riverrun's towers and said to Robb Stark, "Do not grow too used to bargaining with me. I am not an inexhaustible coin." "You are not coin," Robb said. "You are leverage, and leverage breaks if you strain it past its fulcrum. I will stop before the beam snaps. I am not my enemies." Jaime's laugh was a bark. "We will see," he said lightly. "When your heart grows heavy, you will find out what it can be used as besides a drum." The galley that took Jaime south took Sansa north. She stood with Davos again under a sky that remembered sun only because the river had told it a story. The wind lifted her hair, and she smoothed it as if she were in a courtyard and had time to be concerned with prettiness. She slept wrapped in furs that smelled of men and smoke and did not wake screaming every night. When she did scream, it was quieter, and the river carried it away quickly and did not return an echo. Robb watched the lines on the maps of the Riverlands bend in ways that pleased him and ways that did not. He listened to Bolton without liking him and to the Blackfish with liking and sometimes less listening than his uncle deserved. He wrote to Theon Greyjoy and told him to stand near Winterfell and listen for the sea's mood, and he wrote to White Harbor and asked Wyman Manderley to keep eyes on the horizon and nets in the shallow places. He did not send Theon to Pike to be a message. The thought came to him once and left a bad taste like scorched oil. "Your father taught you not to send a boy to a man who hates boys," Howland Reed said when Robb spoke the thought aloud. "Keep him. A wolf does not ask a tide to sit." "Alon Greyjoy will not sit," Robb said. "He will not rise as quickly if he thinks no one expects him," Howland replied. In the Reach, Renly Baratheon held court under green banners where roses had been stitched in with gold thread. He had a word for every ear and a smile for every mouth. He had an army that smelled of clover and wine. Brienne of Tarth stood behind him like a wall that had learned to move. When news reached him of Jaime's capture and Sansa's rescue and Stannis' council at Storm's End grafting more branches each week, Renly tossed the letter onto a table with a flounce that was deliberate. "Brother," he said lightly, though Stannis was not there to hear him, "you collect laws as other men collect debts. You will use them to buy something only if the seller has never been hungry." He looked at Mace Tyrell. "Shall we feed the realm, Lord Mace? Or shall we feed ourselves with the notion that we are feeding it and then watch our hands become fat?" Mace beamed, which was his manner of thinking. "We will feed what we can bite, Your Grace." "Such wisdom," Renly drawled. "It is almost as if you were a boar and not a man. We will be kind when kindness buys us love and stern when sternness buys us fear. Above all, we will be easy to look at while we do both." He leaned back. "Stannis will grind. The lions will gnash. I will arrive when men are too weary of both to object to a pleasant king." If a shadow ever flickered against the silk of his tent that night, it did not linger long enough for Brienne to put a sword through it. There are nights when knives change the world. This was not yet one. At the wall, the wind had found new teeth. The ranging went out in a long black line that seemed to pull the sky with it. Men rode with faces set toward places that had never known their names. Ghosts trotted near Jon's knee and sometimes ranged ahead like a thought you are not sure you wish to have. The fist of the first men rose out of the forest like a knuckle under a skin, and when they found it, Jeor Mormont looked at the rough ring of old stones and nodded as a man nods at a chair he can sleep in without dreaming. They found the cache buried under a cairn that had not wanted to be disturbed. A horn that made Sam's hands tremble and was set aside by command. Wrapped daggers of black glass that drank light and made Bowen Marsh's eyes narrow suspiciously. Arrowheads that in the hand were colder than ice and warmer than hope. "What in the seven bloody are these?" Tywin muttered, rubbing his fingers as if they had been bitten. "Dragonglass," Jon said, because Old Nan had told stories and Maester Luwin had told truths, and both felt useful here. "Obsidian. Names do not make knives," Marsh said. "They do," Jeor Mormont replied, surprising them all. "The right names do. Keep them safe. We will test them soon enough if the gods have developed a sense of timing." They did not have to wait long. The night they spent on the fist before pushing farther was a night that taught men which of them were made of thicker cloth. The cold was a creature that walked among the tents and sat down sometimes without asking. Dogs whined and then went silent. The stars had a distance to them that made prayer seem like sending a child to fetch a mountain. In the deepest hour, Ghost lifted his head and made a sound Jon had not heard before, a muted bay that seemed not for men but for something in the trees. The horses jittered and rolled eyes that showed too much white. Jon rose and went to the ring of stones with Longclaw in his hand and the dragonglass dagger tucked awkwardly at his belt. He knelt and set his palm to the earth and felt it like a drum under skin. A beating that was not a heartbeat and a stillness that was not a pause. When the first white came at the eastern edge, it came fast and without calling, as if it had just now recalled breath and decided to mock it. The arrow that took it at the neck pinned a piece of cloak to a tree. The thing did not slow. Jon moved without thinking and thrust the black glass into the meat above where its heart had been. The white's eyes went white and then blank, as if a pane of ice had clouded and then cracked. It felt like a man dropping a heavy burden and deciding to follow it rather than hold on. "Remember," Mormont's voice came from somewhere behind him, harsh and calm. "Fire or this. Still for men. Fire and this for what men become when they are too cold." The watch learned quickly because the lesson would kill them if they did not. Men who had laughed at Sam for dropping his spoon watched his hands chip careful flakes off the edges of the glass to make the arrowheads tack cleaner. Jon slept 2 hours and dreamed of a wall of black water held back by a thin plank. When he woke, he felt older and also less young, which seemed a different thing. Ravens carried more letters than men liked to think writing could carry news. In Riverrun, Ned read one from the wall and felt the skin on his arms pull tight. He found Brynden and showed him the words without summoning Catelyn first, because he had learned which orders to keep. "Then we will send men," the Blackfish said simply, as if the thing a man wanted most were always the thing he must do first. "We will send bread as if we loved them. We will send smiths to mend what breaks in the cold. We will send boys who will be less boys when they come back and perhaps not monsters as you fear." His mouth bent into a shadow of humor. "We will also send a great many ravens asking for credit to be extended by any household that will listen, because our larders did not grow larger during war." Wyman Manderley has a stomach as big as his heart, Ned said. He will help if it helps to say he is helping. I will write to him as if he were the only lord in the realm with a pantry. Catelyn listened and did not say that she had already written to Wyman with words that did not flatter so much as remind him of the face he preferred to see in his mirror. Sansa sat nearby with needle in hand, working a hem that had been done once and unpicked. The girl's face had changed in small ways, the way a house changes when you move the furniture where only those who live there will notice. She looked up and met her father's eye and then her mother's. If Arya comes here, she said, do not tell her to behave. She will not. She will only try and then be worse at it. Catelyn's mouth softened. We will tell her to be herself and then give the household a week's warning, she said, and Sansa smiled with the sudden brightness of a girl who remembers she can. Tyrion walked the walls of King's L, anding and felt the chain lying coiled like an idea in the river's throat. He traded cruelties with Cersei politely. He let Joffrey strut in safe places. He sent the city watch to drill in alleys where the poor would see them and think for a while that the men who worked for the crown might sometimes work for them. He played Syvass with Varys as if moving the dragon and the elephant on a board could teach him how to guard against the versions of both that walked and whispered. The Storm Lord collects lords like a patient man collects kindling. Varys murmured, head tilted. The river has stopped being entirely angry with him. The North gives him the benefit of their dislike. Some men are loved. Some men are respected. Some men are tolerated the way one tolerates the man who holds the rope that keeps you from falling down a clean well, Tyrion said. Stannis is rope. We will begrudge him the rope only when we learn we can fly. And Renly? Varys asked. Renly is a feather bed, Tyrion said. I keep worrying that if I lie on him, I'll fault the stitching. The Tyrells have armies and bread and a habit of living through other men's battles, Varys observed. I know, Tyrion said. If they decide to love us for a fortnight, we will repay them with poetry and not coin. If they decide to love someone else, we will send their cousins a wreath. He did not say that at night when the city quieted in the way cities do, a way that makes their sleeping resemble holding breath. He thought of Jaime in a tent with his wrists bound and felt a child's ache he had never quite killed. He would not speak that ache. He fed it crumbs and asked it to wait. Renly broke camp at Bitterbridge with banners that moved like a gentle forest. He aimed himself toward the city because cities had mirrors and men who liked looking in them liked cities. Stannis turned his eye inland and put his shoulder into the riverlands until the riverlords began to believe the water might remember their names when it ran. Tywin Lannister gnawed and gnawed, moving with the deliberate appetite of a patient animal that knows it will starve the man who flees it. In the north, at Winterfell, Maester Luwin counted candles and bacon sides and boys old enough for spears, and Ser Roderick Castle rubbed his whiskers and said, If men with squid on their banners come to our doors, we will make them swim. Theon Greyjoy stood on the covered way and watched crows lift from the fields and thought of his father who loved ships and not sons. He flexed his hand around the hilt of a sword and told himself that the grip fit his palm fine. Jon rode with Corran Halfhand into the Skirling Pass with snow that fell in flakes so big they seemed cut from linen. The Halfhand's face looked carved from fjord rock. His beard rhymed. They moved as if silence were a companion who would learn to hate you if you walked too fast. The wildling they took was a woman with hair like a fox's hide and a mouth that did not stay shut when it ought, which was how Jon knew immediately he would not be able to kill her. Ygritte laughed at the Watch's black as if it were a foolish decision men had made to look thinner. She told stories when she was not allowed to, and when she was allowed to, she said nothing and looked at the snow. You know nothing, Jon Snow, she said once, apropos of nothing and everything. He could not argue because his head was too full of knowing and none of it belonged to this place. The day the Halfhand asked him to break his oath in one small particular in order to keep it in a larger, Jon tasted iron in his mouth, though he had not been struck. When a man cannot do a thing clean, he must choose which filth he will carry, Corran said. We must know what the wildlings shape in the snow. You have the face for it. He meant the face of a boy, a face men thought they could trust and show the wrong cards to. Jon did not like to think of his face as a tool. He loaned it out anyway. He went with the wildlings the way ice accepts a boot, reluctant, then shaping around it as if it had always meant to. Ygritte walked with him sometimes out in front of the others and told him of towers that once had been here and wolves that grew so large they cast shade on villages. He said little. He watched. He learned the shape of their hunger and the way Mance Rayder's name fit men's mouths differently than a king's name fit it. Mance was music they could hum. Kings had been men who made them cough. When word came north that Sansa Stark had reached Riverrun and that Ned Stark lived and that men were speaking aloud the thing Jon had not asked to hear, his name that was and was not his, you would not have known it in Jon's face. He let the news come as if it were a bird landing on a branch he did not own. He slept and dreamt of a room of red stones and a woman whose hands smelled like crushed flowers and fear. He woke to Ygritte's H&H and pretended that here, in this cold, he could choose not to bleed. At Storm's End, Howland Reed sat with Stannis in a high room where the wind insisted on being part of the council. They spoke of ways to make lords do what law demanded and ways to make law do what need demanded. Howland drank from a cup of hot water and nettles and made faces that would have amused a different man. "You do not like men," Stannis said, as if this were a puzzle piece he had discovered under a table. "I do," Howland said. "I like them too much to lie to them as often as they prefer." "You will stay with me," Stannis said. "Others flatter me. You remind me that the rules I keep for myself cannot be the ones I demand of people who need supper." He looked toward the sea, which had its back up. "When the lions and the flowers decide to climb the same ladder, we will be ready to pull it away. Until then, we will do the dull work." Davos called that bookkeeping. Cresson called it mercy. Stannis called it governance, and disliked the taste of the word but chewed anyway. At Riverrun, Sansa found Arya in the second week of frost. Yoren had not lived to see the gate. A grave with a stone that said he had done 1,000 small brave things held him on a hill where the wind would remind men of stubbornness. Arya came in with hair hacked and a boy's gait and a sword at her hip that had been made for sticking, not for ceremony. She smelled like horse and wet wool and looked like a world Sansa had learned to pretend did not exist. They did not run to each other. They stood 3 paces apart and measured what time had done to the shapes they remembered. Then Arya grinned and said, "You look like a pastry," and Sansa laughed. And then they closed the last 3 paces and came together hard enough to hurt and did not mind the hurt. "Did you dance?" Sansa whispered later, when they were in a chamber with a hearth that took work to convince into cheer. "Once long ago," Arya said. "He took them, though." "Who?" Sansa asked, and Arya's eyes went somewhere else for a second and then came back with flint in them. "No one," she said, "and everyone." She changed the subject by forcing it. "Father. Alive," Sansa said. "Stubborn. Made more stubborn by nearly dying." "Good," Arya said, as if she had expected nothing else. She took needle out and ran her thumb along it. "We will not be gentle," she announced to the air. "We will be kind," Sansa said. "Not the same." Arya wrinkled her nose. "You talk like Septa Mordane." "You smell like a stable," Sansa retorted, and Arya laughed and then cried and then laughed again because both felt right. The galley carrying the first load of Manderley grain to the wall nearly foundered in a squall that came down like a house. Davos stood with his legs braced and his fingers white where the sea hurt them when it got a chance. He was not a man given to prayer in the way other men liked to be seen praying, but he muttered once to a god he had never named aloud. The storm leaned, then decided to leave its argument for a later day. White Harbor's flower reached Eastwatch under guard that kept knives from it, and men who ate bread that night spoke less fearfully and slept more like men who could wake in the morning and do work. Tyrion stood on the wall and watched the Tyrell banners tilt in the distance and considered the taste of treachery and whether it always came seasoned with necessity. He thought of a parley he had arranged to deliver a girl he had not been able to keep safe. He thought of a brother who would be traded again if need demanded it. He thought of the wildfire in the cellars and hoped it would never have to tell its story to the river. He patted the parapet and said, "Do not betray me," as if stone were the only friend a man might trust to keep his counsel. In the Reach, Marjorie Tyrell held a cup for a child with a fever and told a story about a lion that learned to swim because the river decided it would not move for it. She did not know whether the story was true. She suspected it did not matter. In the far north, in a place called Craster's Keep that was neither, John looked at a man who gave daughters their mother's names and called it thrift and felt something in him go cold in a way that had nothing to do with the air. He watched Gilly and tried to rehearse arguments with a law that made monsters of men who followed it too tightly and monsters of men who did not follow it enough. "We will take a child if it is dying," he told Corin. "We will break a rule that is a lie to keep one that is a truth." "You have learned something," the half-hand said. "Do not expect it to make you comfortable." By the time Winter's first serious remonstrance came down the King's Road like a man determined to collect past due rent, the realm had learned to breathe in a new way. Stannis's council had grown teeth and did not show them often. The North had chosen to remember the realm's law and not to choose a king of its own for love of the man who had taught it law first. Renly masked and delayed and smiled and gathered bread. The Lannisters held the city and spun webs that caught them as often as their prey. Ned wrote one night in Riverrun with the fire low and a blanket around his knee and a lamp that smoked. He wrote to Robb about the smell of frost apples and not setting too much store by applause. He wrote to John of ovens and bridges and his pride and his fear and torn promises stitched into something that might hold. He wrote to Stannis briefly, because brevity was how their friendship, such as it was, walked. "You do not owe me kindness. You owe the realm what you can give. I will do the same." He set the quill down and went to the open slit of the window and looked out at the river's back. It shone dark in the moon. He could hear Arya snoring through a wall and Sansa's voice murmuring to a maid who had learned her tenderness again. Catelyn stirred in her sleep and murmured something about a boy who had taken a fishhook through his thumb and refused to cry. Ned smiled because he remembered the boy and the way pride could be a bandage. He did not know how this would end. He knew only that men he loved were where they ought to be. At walls, on roads, under banners they chose rather than the banners they were told they must love. He rested his forehead against cold stone and let it take some of his heat. Outside, the river went on doing the work it had always done. Carrying, wearing, refusing, agreeing on its own terms. He found a kind of peace in the thought that even kings and their games could not convince rivers to be anything but rivers for long. In the morning, he rose and went to put one foot in front of the other where the work waited. The day did not promise kindness, promised shape. For a man like Eddard Stark, that was a form of grace.